Honors Econs 198, Chapter 2, Power of Trade and Comparative Advantage. This chapter will talk about how different countries can specialize different aspects of the market that come together that you can experience every segment of it. Their example was a fruit salad and how dates from Egypt, kiwis from New Zealand, and mangoes from Mexico, and bananas from Guatemala. All these places coming together just so you could have a fruit salad. But it goes back to that invisible hand. The first part of the chapter, 2.1, talks about trading preferences and how through the creation of eBay, a lot of people have been able to trade things that they may consider that has little value to them but has great value to someone else. They gave a story about the creator of eBay. When he was 20 years old, finished the code, first thing he did was grabbed a broken laser pointer and put it listing on eBay for $1. It sold for 14. So he contacted the buyer, telling him, or making sure he knew that it was broken. And then the buyer, of course, said, I know, I'm a collector of broken laser pointers. I don't know how true that is, but the idea is that one man's trash is another person's treasure. That's a saying as old as time. But I really said it prior with people value different things and different abilities, and trade makes the whole place better by allowing everyone to get what they want. You know, when you're reading like information non-fictional books, they go over a very specific topic, but they go in so much depth that you can't seem to make sure you don't forget it. This next one, they go about specialization and how it wouldn't have been possible if not for trade, and because specialization exists, the cumulative human knowledge increases. People can get more than they want. People can study more than they want. Even jobs considered mundane, like dog walkers or manicurists, people who paint nails. Or not paint, I don't know this. Because of them, all of a sudden, all these doctors, gastrologists, surgeons, have the ability to do what they're doing, have the ability to spend more time on their aspects. It doesn't. If I'm studying the creators to sell bananas, I could team up with someone who's putting the most knowledge in growing bananas. That way, everyone can have bananas, and people can take our knowledge to spread it out across other fruits and other foods. This is an important segment as it goes over comparative advantage as well as a couple other things that later on that are of significant importance, so I'm breaking this into two segments. We briefly went over this in the prior chapter with incentives and what was the exact terminology. Trade-offs are everywhere. Like, you can be so good at one thing, but if this other skill you might not be as good at produces a lot more, you should do that second thing. It says how Brazil has a climate ideal for growing sugar. China has abundance of low-skilled workers. United States is one of the best educated workforces in the world. Taking advantage of that, it makes sense for Brazil to produce sugarcane, China to be a large manufacturer, and the United States to be a large developer. And then it goes over absolute advantage, which is saying you have the greatest of one. You can supply a good or service at a cost with less inputs than another person. Let's give labor units as an example. Don't think about it too deep. They specifically said they used Mexico as an example. With, let's say, it takes Mexico 12 units of labor to make one computer and 2 units of labor to make one shirt. In theory, you could make 6 shirts in the time for you to make one computer, but one computer is worth a lot more than 6 shirts. They might be the greatest at producing shirts, but if that computer is still worth more, then they should make that computer. This dispersion of efforts, because you don't necessarily have to make those 24 units is what you work versus you don't necessarily have to produce 2 computers or 12 shirts. Instead, you could make 1 computer and 6 shirts if you want. This alternation between what you want to produce with your division of labor is called production possibilities frontier, or PPF for short. And then it says that assume that United States has, since we have a greater intellectual workforce, are skilled, educated, whatever word you want to use, we could produce a computer for 1 labor unit. Then it only makes sense that we should produce 24 computers and 0 shirts. Now keep in mind how this is different from opportunity cost. Back to that Mexico example with 2 units of labor for a shirt, 6 for a computer. While yes, they could inevitably make 7 shirts, the opportunity cost of that 7th shirt is an entire computer. That's the point. The division of resources and the way it can be used is the PPF. The cost of any additional things, any additional production is the opportunity cost because it could be delivered elsewhere. And specifically, they actually put a diagram with these things, how the opportunity cost for Mexico of 1 computer is 6 shirts. The opportunity cost for 1 shirt in Mexico is 1/6 of the computer. But you can't exactly produce more, so my example still says that the 7th shirt costs an entire computer. In the United States, assuming that's 1 and 1, as I said prior, the cost of 1 computer is 1 shirt, and the cost of 1 shirt is 1 computer. In their own economies, a single shirt is worth, in Mexico, a computer is worth 6 shirts. Versus the US, it's 1 computer is 1 shirt. This is explained by the fact that the United States can produce computers more often. But if you were to stick specifically with Mexico, they still might want to focus on the computer instead of the shirt, simply because needs of communities differ in between. What I failed to mention was that in Mexico, if you wanted, the cost computer is 1/6 of a shirt. That's relatively cheap in comparison. The cost of a shirt in the U.S. is, the cost of computer in the U.S. is 1 entire shirt. So that's you can make 1 shirt for the price of an entire computer. That's a really expensive shirt. And because of this specialization, that inevitably, if a trade grew between simply the U.S. and Mexico, each one can specialize in the other. The United States can create computers and trade them for shirts, while Mexico can create shirts because they'll be able to create inevitably significant. They can create, since it's worth more valuable for them to, more unit-wise, to produce those shirts than it is for United States to. And they may only have to trade maybe 5 shirts for a computer if they want to get an advantage, and if so, still, it's significantly better than the United States is. 1 shirt for an entire computer. Therefore, both parties end up happier than the other. The example explicitly stated is that if Mexico has that 12 units of labor, United States has 24. Suppose that Mexico and the U.S. are both producing half and half. 1 computer can go for 3 shirts, which is significantly cheaper than for the U.S. as I stated prior. And in exchange, because of that, Mexico can produce 6 more. both are left significantly better off in both quantities, actually. Again, pausing and unpausing. Mexico is now able to consume one computer and 9 shirts because they take the computer from the U.S. and out of the 6 they would have produced, they still get 9. In comparison to them only ending up with 6 shirts and 1 computer. This way, both countries end up gaining more from the trade, despite the United States being more productive, producing both with more time. They could, in theory, get rid of Mexico entirely, or they could just keep. That sounds harsh. The point is, they could bypass Mexico entirely, but because they're so able to allocate more and more time to creating computers, and less to creating the shirts that they may need. And thus, the difference between absolute advantage and comparative advantage. You could be able to produce something the greatest, hence the example being U.S. being creative computers and shirts better than Mexico, but still they don't produce shirts. You can't truly have one producer creating so many more things because there's still division of labor and other capabilities that are withholding them from taking their production to the infinities. Not to say there aren't harms from this division of labor. I believe Haiti is strangulated by this trade, there's significantly greater options because just their food, their corn, the United States is incredible at producing corn, and because they trade for Haiti, Haiti no longer buys it from their own dealers, and their farmers, they can't stay in business as long, so they end up collapsing and firing their employees all over and which ends up with less money in their economy because it's all going over to the United States, but more food that's only short-term gets consumable. Another thing about all this comparative advantages and absolute advantages is we didn't even discuss wages in that division of labor, the units of labor as discussed. There may be less units of labor as opportunities, or less people trying to go for lower wages in the United States and the same wages sent over to Mexico, as they are historically poorer than the U.S. and get lower wages. And so they may have a greater allocation of potentially units of labor when it comes to producing laptops, but a firm may only be able to produce 6 units of labor if they're only producing shirts. Of course, these are just egregious numbers. These are just example numbers with no facts truly behind them. In this context, wage doesn't necessarily have to be the producing employee. It could just be the overall profits from what's outside of it. I'm going to rip these numbers straight out of the text. Let's suppose that computers sell for $300 and shirts for $100, consistent with that three shirts, 1 computer trade that was specified prior. Let's look at the situation with no trade. The value of Mexican consumption is 1 times 300 plus 6 times 100, total of 900, because the 3 shirts they sold for 1 computer, but they were only producing shirts, while there are 24 workers. The average wage is $37.50. The value of consumption is 12 times 300 plus 12 times 100. 4,800. So the U.S. wage is $200. This is what if the U.S. goes half computers, half shirts. And then with trade, you can alter things over because Mexico now has 1 computer, but they produced 9. But they still have 9 shirts. Where they both allocated 12 units into both. In the prior example, 12 units into computers, 12 units into shirts. They were able to produce 1 computer, 6 shirts. That's 900. I misspoke with that. That was prior to the trade. While the United States produces 12 computers and 12 shirts. And we already said the wages. Total consumption over Mexico and United States produced 13 computers and producing 18 shirts. Now, with this trade that I previously said, where 1 times 300 plus 9 times 100 equals 12,000 for a wage of 50, which is greater than that 37 where they did that trade, because they can spend more time doing the shirts and get more profit. Wage is now, while the U.S. wage is now $216.67, because they were able to allocate just a little bit more time on computers than shirts. And the wages are still lower for Mexico than it is for the United States, because of the simple fact that it costs significantly less for the United States to produce one thing than the other, that they're able to take more profits from the end result. And I was wrong again about the wages. Each employee in Mexico, with the given example, was close to that $50 after that trade exchange, prior to that $37.50, which is a significant improvement, or the value they produce, not necessarily the wage they take home. While in the United States, it's still an up by a smaller margin, because they were already producing so much more. They gave a good example with, trade makes both Einstein and his less clever accountant better off, but does not make an accountant a skilled scientist like Einstein. And as a summary, workers in the United States often fear trade because they think that they cannot compete in with low-wage workers in other countries. Meanwhile, workers in low-wage countries fear trade because they think they cannot compete with high-productivity countries like the United States. It's almost kind of, but not really, where during the Great Depression, Roosevelt said that the only thing to fear is the fear itself, because it was spiraling out and causing massive problems with the Great Depression than it would have been if it was better contained. However, not really, because of the fact that this is just fear that shouldn't exist. That's unnecessary fear rather than fear building upon fear. And a quote directly from Adam Smith. It is the maximum of every prudent master of a family never to attempt to make home what it will cost him more to make than to buy. The tailor does not attempt to make his shoes, but buys them of the shoemaker. The shoemaker does not attempt to make his own clothes, but employs a tailor. What is prudent is that the conduct of every every private family can scarce to folly, in that of a great kingdom. A foreign country may supply with commodities cheaper than we ourselves can make it. Better buy it with them, with some part of the produce our own industry employed in a way that we still have some advantage. I rephrase that final sentence. Employed in a way in which we have some advantage. I'm not supposed to paraphrase it, so I try to read it directly off the script. And with the final segment of this chapter, it goes briefly into explaining how trade and globalization isn't exactly a new thing. It's gone back all the way over to the ancient Romans and how they were transferring across the Mediterranean Sea. Introduction of technology that just made the world smaller and allowed for those transference to happen more frequently and more often at a larger scale. I just said more frequently and more often. Anyways. And as I gave with the example of Haiti, free trade isn't always better. Sometimes it's important that a country is able to build up its own infrastructure prior to the trade being built. Or having this trade, people that bring them into trade can inevitably supply specific things to increase their infrastructure in exchange for there to get specific discounts on specific items of trade. However, that in of itself is very controversial because it's happened in a lot of African countries where these European colonies have came and divided it. Oh, we'll put money into your infrastructure, but this infrastructure will inevitably benefit us in causing almost modern time slavery. And there's a mini questionnaire at the very bottom with 3 questions, so it's very many. What does specialization do to productivity? Specialization increases productivity as it allows for more diverse knowledge that allows you to be greater at what you're doing. And the answer is specialization increases productivity because it increases knowledge. Okay then. How does trade let us benefit from the advantages of specialization? It allows for you to disperse value amongst others. As the value of shining your own shoes might be, if you're a shoe shiner, might be nearly nothing, but it might be significantly more valuable to that of a old-timey royal person with shoes needing to be shined. Answer is, if people can't trade for other goods, they won't specialize in producing just one good. Thus, trade is necessary if people are to benefit from specialization. I was kind of right, mostly wrong. Because they're going for more of the reason for it, which I skimmed over. Excellent answer. Usain Bolt is the world's fastest human. Usain could probably mow his lawn very quickly, but much more quickly, and at least as well as Harry, who mows lawns for a living. Why would Usain Bolt pay Harry to mow his lawn rather than do it himself? Well, it's because of the fact that Usain Bolt's time is much better spent running or training for running than it is mowing his lawn. Usain Bolt has comparative advantage in running, but Harry has comparative advantage in mowing. Mowing Usain's lawn because Harry faces a much lower opportunity cost in mowing lawns than Usain Bolt does. And that is the end of the chapter. There's a takeaway, which I might skim over, but I really got to get to other classes.